Hello, everybody. Today I got a special guest, but before we get to my special guest, actually, it's my first time I've ever had anybody important on this little thing that I've been doing with my beekeeping ventures on YouTube. But since the last video, we've been going around feeding all of our nucleus colonies, all the production yards, anything that needs food, pollen substitute, and syrup pretty regularly over the last 3 weeks now. Well, 2 weeks, but. This yard in particular was a yard that we shot at last time, but they're building up nicely. You guys will see plenty of frames of brood and bees here coming up into the next few weeks as I film. But I wanted to make this video and incorporate a friend of mine, somebody I've known. We were just actually talking, like, when did we first meet? Anyways, I'll pan the camera here. Maybe you recognize this man. This is Dr. Zac Lamas. Zac, hello.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome aboard. So anyways, I'm bad at orchestrating conversation outside of just something that doesn't, without a camera. But I met Zac. We correct me if I'm wrong, Zac. You've lived in New Hampshire, right?
Yep.
For a good while.
Yep.
So I live here as well. But we kind of had these circles of working with other beekeepers, just as the community of beekeepers is tight in most states. So I heard about Zac through a mutual friend, and I think actually since we've talked, like the one memory I have of you early on where I think maybe we first met was at a New Hampshire Beekeepers Association meeting, and you were giving a presentation.
Yeah.
And maybe before, I think we talked like just outside of physically meeting on the phone quite a bit.
It was weird because I actually knew of you much longer than I actually knew you. And at the time when I was first hearing about you, I was milking cows.
Oh, yep.
So my ability to kind of get away from the farm was pretty limited.
Yep.
And it was through Keith Cutting, and he had a farm stand right next to me at the Wilmette Farmers Market. And then he told me about this young guy, Troy, and everything he was doing with bees. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was kind of it. And then I'd hear your name pop up. And then I think, my first memories was either a winter conference, but I don't think you were there, and you got an award. And then, that New Hampshire beekeeper thing, I was so excited to give a presentation, and I brought hives to it. And then at the presentation, I opened up the hives, and they just had overt EFB in them. Mm-hmm. And I had never seen it like that. I didn't know they had them. I wouldn't have brought them. And so I kind of had to modify my presentation pretty quick, and Troy did the kindest thing ever, which is he walked up afterwards and just said his experience, what's going on with them, and possible management strategies to take care of it. And I think that was like my first real memory of you, but it's kind of weird because I have so many other memories where I knew of you.
Yeah.
But I didn't actually know you.
Yeah, no, and I think like over the years, like we've had plenty of phone conversations back and forth. We've both been influenced by the same kind of beekeepers that are, well known in this area. Guys like Michael Palmer and Kirk Webster, and have, kind of like we're working relationships with these men, and just kind of like we both have our own little, kind of, relationships. And I was thinking, like, it's really been fun because as time goes by and as we get older, as life happens, it's amazing to see, like, from my perspective, like what you've been doing, the decisions you've made, to take the time and energy to divulge yourself to kind of, more to where you're a doctor. You got your doctorate. Well, you can explain, like, what have you done in the last I don't know how long it's been. I guess time flies by. Has it been 8 years? 5 years?
Longer than that.
10 years?
Because it's been, I started my PhD in 2018, and that's 6 years ago now?
Yeah.
Yeah, time flies.
Yep.
I guess 5.5. But no, my business, so we both went through Kirk and Mike.
Yep.
And I was working for Mike and still running my own small migratory operation. Mm-hmm. And I was essentially just making queens and nukes on the coast of North Carolina. And then as Mike's season was starting to open up in northern Vermont, I would drive everything up north and unload my hives in New York and then start working for him. And I got to a point where, like, this is no longer tenable. Like, I was falling asleep at the wheel at night after working my hives and having to do sobriety tests just because, you're falling asleep and the cop sees you.
Yep.
But I still wanted to work for Mike. So either I have to stop working for him all completely and scale up my business, or just stop my business and just work for Mike. And the third option was, I could go back to school.
Yeah.
And I opted for that because what Varroa was doing inside of honeybee colonies wasn't, my experience with them and what I was observing wasn't lining up with what researchers were saying, and I really wanted to pursue that question. And I got some pretty good advice in terms of, you can always make bees.
Yep.
And that's really true. And I think this yard here is a really good testament of how good, especially northern beekeepers, have gotten at making bees.
Yep.
Year after year. Because this is, how many colonies did it take to make all of these nukes here?
Well, yeah, we probably had, there was around 66 or 68 that went into the winter, or went into the winter with here, and that came from probably maybe, I don't know, 12, 13 colonies.
Yeah, small number of colonies to expand with.
Yep.
And I know I just diverted right there.
No, that's a good, it's an organic conversation.
Yeah. So anyways, and so I've been doing research since, and been really fortunate to have so much working experience when going to do my PhD and now my postdoc under Jay Evans, and to continue pursuing this mite story. But it was definitely a divergent path, considering not up here in the North Country anymore. And
well, what is there anything, without, you can't disclose everything to the world on the internet, but is there anything that you're working on right now that you're excited about, that kind of gets you up in the morning and puts a grin on your face? And
actually the nice thing working with Jay is I would say we both approach work in similar ways. We both approach it as if it's play.
Yep.
And we'll work hard and we'll do tedious things, but you can kind of see we're still playing as we do it. So almost everything we do, when you approach work that way, is exciting.
Good.
And I would almost say that if the project isn't exciting, it usually means it doesn't have as much value as we think it should, or it's not going to be a big gap in knowledge. So we tend not to do those projects.
Nice.
And so that's kind of just like a mainstay of how we approach work, right? And I'm really fortunate to be in that environment where we can do that. So we have a couple things that I'm really excited about. With this Varroa story, mostly what I do is the disease ecology part of it. Essentially, we study parameters that are really important in terms of like how Varroa move or kill your colony or actually impact bees on the individual level. And once we identify something on the individual level, we expand it out. How does it affect your bees on the colony level, the apiary level, or in between apiaries?
Yep.
And so right now I have a project where we're trying to see if we're actually just keeping Varroa persistent in our operations through some splitting or some management. And this is really important because then we can start to do risk estimates. You have one hotspot colony. How many infested colonies does it cause? Or how much risk in terms of winter loss to other colonies does it cause within one season? Once we can get those risk estimates, then you can actually make a decision based upon, should I do drone comb removal or treat this colony, or should I move the other ones away from it? But you can make those decisions, and instead of just kind of like doing it like on a whim or I feel like this way, you'd be like, no, this is the risk estimate. And I really want to pursue that work. The other is I studied Varroa behavior for so long, and the point of this was just to study how its behavior drives viral transmission. But now we've studied enough, and we had enough findings that we're using that and weaponizing it against Varroa. We know that we can manipulate lab environment conditions and get them to engage in certain behavior, or to cluster, or to clump onto certain things. We know that they clump onto individual bees in the colonies. So what we're trying to do is identify which conditions in the environment, and also which essentially smells are they really interested in. Can we make a bait trap for Varroa? Or can we identify smells that they really don't like and actually make a deterrent for Varroa, kind of like DEET for ticks? And these are some of the ways that we're trying to weaponize our findings against Varroa. And our, kind of our Willy Wonka golden ticket would be if we can make a bait trap for Varroa. It would essentially be an organic sticky trap that you put inside of a colony. They climb onto it, get stuck, and you remove it. This would be similar. We're in an apple orchard right here, and they must have some pheromone traps.
They might have. I don't know if there's...
Probably not this time of the year, but...
If you guys are familiar with orchards and orchardists, they use, like, you see like the one like perfect red apple, in the early spring, or at least when it's the one thing you don't want to pick, but it's the bait traps that they use for sampling.
And that's what we're trying to do. And then going back to the first point, the other is, and we briefly talked on it, I'm still trying to find ways to describe it well, but we need a long-term genetic solution to Varroa, and we got people like you that are running these breeding programs. It takes a lot of extra work to do that. Instead of just producing nukes and honey, there's a whole other tier of management that you have to do, and you have to have so many extra resources just to provide those. I'm sure you've already told your group about that. But we also have these short-term needs where we have to manage this really complex disease system.
Yep.
And what I'm trying to do is take that conversation and separate it into its two separate parts.
Yep.
And the way I do that is I just focus on the disease management.
Yep.
You know, what are the major parameters that are going to prevent someone from getting to their long-term goal?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm working on. And anytime we kind of jump into that, there's always going to be something lucrative that we can find.
Yep.
It just takes a lot of work to get there.
And that's been very, just in my, Zac and I, our working relationship in the last few seasons, like Zac's work on my basic, Billy Bob beekeeper kind of mentality that I run on is his view that I'm not paying attention to. The lens in which he's approaching and looking at beekeeping is different than the way I'm looking at it. So it's almost like iron sharpens iron. And it's been very helpful for me, especially since the collapse of my apiary just back, 4 years ago or 3 seasons ago, not too long ago. But when Zac came on, that was right after my apiary had completely collapsed, and he was looking for colonies to implement to implement a research project on. So, anyways, I had some colonies, but I was just kind of getting built back up. But all the things he was doing when you were sampling, you were essentially feeding back to me everything you were seeing that I didn't have time to see. And it was very helpful for me to start to formulate a new way going forward of how to manage my apiary, because I didn't want to repeat the 90% collapse again.
Yeah.
So Zac was able to say, like, hey, this particular apiary we're just in it, these are dead beehives walking. So I could go in there and then really target, with Formic Pro or whatever, to be able to keep that apiary going. But my point is that it's been very helpful and very inspirational for me in the last few seasons working with you, Zac, and to have you kind of come in and just, for me, again, just listening and trying to understand where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of my problem in life, is just trying to understand people. Mm-hmm. So I just listen and like, okay, what gets you excited? Where, like you said, you're looking at this from disease management, and that's wonderful. Like I'm not, as a beekeeper, I hate to say this because it might sound like a bad kind of way to keep bees, but I seldom think of disease management. I'm always on thinking of like reproductive management.
Yeah.
Like, how do I take this and make X and multiply this by
Well, I think that's, you've heard me say it before. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm interrupting.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
But I'm smiling because, like, you went through Kirk and Mike.
Yeah.
You came down here. You got this beautiful valley that you work in, and you've really figured out how to make tons of bees.
Mm-hmm.
And Kirk has and Mike has, and it's really amazing. And I just think about the parasites all day long.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I was working your hives or mine, but at one point I was just like, man, from a parasites perspective, these guys are really awesome. They're constantly making me new hosts.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a criticism. It's just we essentially find different ways to ask the same question we've been asking over and over.
Yep.
And once we do that, then we can really start a research project. And you've allowed us to do that here. To toss a compliment back to you, we can't afford to run this project without you. I mean, it's just so many colonies. We'd have several apiary managers at the USDA to run it, right?
Yep.
And so researchers are really reliant upon stakeholders where we could have access and do this.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, you've been the easiest stakeholder ever to work with.
Oh, good.
Both in terms, I mean, you have some inherent things that work out, like you're not migratory, right?
Yep.
And you're not just treating things all the time.
Yep.
So we can really come in and do an experiment. You also return my texts, which is actually really helpful.
Good. I try.
So any other stakeholder that's like listening to this and possibly want to do a project, just return to the text. It can cause us so much anxiety.
Yeah.
But it's really allowed us to pursue some questions that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just very life in general. I'm always thinking of I have no control over who comes and goes.
Yeah.
It's just kind of things happen, and just to be able to think back and know that most of the people in life for me today, at this age of my life, or I'm in my late 30s, you have family. I don't get out much, with this type of work too. It's like it's just so demanding. So the people that I do kind of constantly come up against, in my network, my social networks, have significant value. So you're one of those guys that a colleague, a friend, you check off all the boxes, and it's like all of it is full of value to me in a sense. So, and it's not just like I'm trying to talk Zac up and just because I have a camera on, but the camera does help spur a conversation. But my point is that it's been very nice to work with you, and to kind of see you evolve and see myself evolve, and think of like, where are we going to be in the next 30 years if we're alive, or who knows what good could come of the work that we're doing. And I talked with other beekeepers, again, like my friend Corey Stevens. I think some of the best work to happen in this kind of endeavor with research and the advancements in the beekeeping industry is coming, and correct me, I say this with humility, but is going to come off of the backs of people who aren't. It's going to come from the ground up, in a sense. It's where it's going to come from people who have a genuine effort, and the desire to kind of roll up their sleeves and to get a job done, and just to pull the thread and see what comes of it, with more evidence, more data, or just more, more improvements in the industry that we're both working in.
Well, to that point, you guys have all the data. I mean, you're in colonies more than me, and you're in more colonies more often than me. When your brain becomes this essentially big data, right? And beekeepers are amazing at seeing patterns over time, or seeing repetition and between the seasons, and then it starts to influence your management, right? We just don't realize that you literally are the big computer brain. It's just some of it we don't always know the parameter that's really important, or the confounder. And ends it up making things like a little bit more difficult. I'm trying to think of one that we've talked about. Oh, you had just brought it up. I hope you don't mind me bringing it up.
Go ahead.
You were talking about either pesticides or viruses growing in comb over time. And as you were talking about that, I'm like, oh man, I've had these colonies I've essentially left alone for a few years, and they finally just died this year. And I was a little bummed about it. I'm like, oh, that's something that's really difficult to test over time, is are viruses and pesticides growing in that comb over time? Do those bees become more susceptible years later on that comb, right? And again, it's just so complex that you have these parameters that you can't always test, you're not aware of. And that's where, when we get nice intersections between research and stakeholders, hopefully we can tackle some of those. Because I still think it's going to be the case that it's going to get more difficult and more expensive to keep bees going, and keep healthy bees going, before it gets easier again.
Well, we're both in it. We're both here to see things improve in whatever way we can help. So anyways, guys, I know most people's attention span for YouTube is like 15 minutes, I think, at the longest part for long videos, so we'll keep this one short. But Zach, thank you.
No, thank you. This is a nice way to finish this time in the yard, and before I get off to go into another one.
That's right. So anyway, Zach, thank you. We'll see you guys later.